Oh dear, it looks like... Well, that was pretty cool. Unfortunately, Connie's new jumping skills aren't going to be much use on the next obstacle. And don't even think about making her jump over the top, because that force field will zap her in a second. Instead, let's give Connie the power to crouch. I bet she's always dreamed of it. If you're still in play mode, switch back to edit mode now. Rewind time with L3 to put Connie back at the start. To give her a crouch, we need to scope into her. Puppets are made up of sculptures, connectors, and gadgets that are grouped together. Hover over Connie, press and hold L1, then press X to scope in. When you've scoped into a puppet, you can see its inner workings. On Connie's back, there's a microchip gadget. It's called Connie's brain, and it contains all her logic and animations. Let's take a look inside. Hold L1 and press X over it to scope in and open the microchip canvas. There's quite a lot going on in here. The gadget I want you to look at is this one in the bottom right corner with the diamond icon. This is a keyframe gadget. If you've played through the Keyframes and Timelines tutorial, you'll already know all about these. Keyframes record changes to things in the scene. They store those changes in a gadget, which can be triggered using logic. This keyframe contains a crouching pose for Connie. Select the keyframe with X, and you'll see a preview of how it looks. Those dashed lines over Connie show that she's being changed by the keyframe. Press circle to deselect the keyframe, and she goes back to normal. To be able to activate the crouch keyframe, we need to connect it to Connie's controller sensor. Then you'll be able to make her crouch with a controller button. In the next step, I'll show you how to do exactly that. To activate the crouch, we're going to connect it to Connie's controller sensor. If you've closed her microchip, scope back into her and then scope into the microchip to open it up again. The controller sensor is the large gadget on Connie's microchip. It has a controller icon on it. Open up its tweak menu with L1 and square. Now you have a microchip and a tweak menu open, you may need to arrange them on the screen. Make sure that the controller sensor and its tweak menu stay to the left. This is because they generate signals, and signals flow through gadgets from left to right in Dreams. You can also save the 3D space position of tweak menus and microchips, or pin them to the screen, using the buttons that appear at the top when hovering over the canvas. This will help you keep them tidy while you're editing logic, which is very important as it's easy to make mistakes. Now, let's take a closer look at that controller sensor. Ah, look, controller buttons. Just what we need. All playable characters contain a controller sensor gadget like this one. But the gadget can also be used for any situation where you want to detect button presses. To assign our keyframe to a button, we just need to wire it to the controller sensor. We won't use a circle button as that depossesses Connie, and X makes her jump. So how about the square button to crouch? Make sure you can see the keyframe on the microchip. Move the tweak menu with R2 if you need to. If you hover over the square button in the controller sensor menu, you'll see ports appear on either side of it. They're just like the ports you see on gadgets. Ports on the left are inputs, and ports on the right are outputs. Now, you need to be very precise for the next part, as it's easy to make a mistake. Carefully hover your imp over the output port of the square button, and press X to create a wire. Stretch that wire over to the keyframe, and connect it to the power port on the bottom of the gadget with X. If at any time you make a mistake, just undo it using the left directional button. Once your crouch move is all wired up, close the controller sensor tweak menu. Hover over it, hold L1, then press circle to close. Now try out Connie's new crouch in play mode. See if she can make it under the second obstacle. When you're ready to continue, go back to edit mode. Rewind time with L3 and start the next step. Right, we're on to the final obstacle. There's no way around it, but it looks destructible. So we're going to make a slam attack for Connie so that she can smash through it. We'll start by recording a pose for the slam. We can do this using a keyframe. Scope back into Connie and open up her microchip if it isn't already open. If you've played my keyframes and timelines tutorial, you'll have a bit of a head start on this next part. Go to the Assembly menu and open the Animate menu. Select the keyframe with X. You'll now have a keyframe gadget on your IMP. Stamp it somewhere in the scene with R2 or X. The keyframe records changes you make to objects and settings in the scene. It starts recording as soon as you stamp it. You can tell it's recording because your IMP will change shape and color. Now that we're recording, grab Connie's upper body with R2 and drag it gently down to the floor. Because we're scoped into her, we can move her body parts individually to create a pose. If we weren't scoped in, we'd move Connie's whole body. Notice that her knees automatically bend. Make sure her cone is all the way down to the floor so that you can't see her legs. Keyframes can record changes to anything, even tweak menu settings. So, just for visual flair, let's also make her glow. Hover over Connie's cone, hold L1 and press square to open its tweak menu. Because we're scoped in, this opens the tweak menu for the sculpture itself, rather than the puppet. All the settings on this page change the way Connie's cone looks. Look for the glow slider on the first page. Its icon is a sun. Raise the glow up to about 40%. Once you've set the glow, select Stop Recording in the context menu to store the changes to the keyframe. You can close the tweak menu now too. Just hover over it, hold L1 and press circle. Select the keyframe gadget with X to preview what's been recorded. Looks good. Deselect the keyframe by pressing circle. In the next step, we'll continue. Continue building Connie's slam attack. Look over it, hold L1 and press circle. Select the keyframe gadget with X to preview what's been recorded. Looks good. Deselect the keyframe by pressing circle. In the next step, we'll continue building Connie's slam attack. The next step is to place our new Connie animation into a timeline. Using a timeline will let us time the animations and effects of the slam attack. Go to the Assembly menu and back to the Animate menu. Select the timeline with X. Hover over Connie's microchip and stamp a timeline above the crouch keyframe. Now let's open the timeline canvas with L1 and X. The slam attack should be a really quick animation. So adjust the canvas so it's only 1 second long. Any longer and it won't feel snappy enough. Hover over the edge of the timeline canvas so that a white line appears along it. You'll also see a white double-ended arrow appear next to the edge by your imp. When you see this, grab the edge of the canvas with X. Move your imp to shorten the timeline to 1 second. Make sure you don't select the trim button by mistake. It's a square button by the numbers at the top of the timeline. It has a black arrow on it. The timeline duration is now correct, but the space is very small. So let's zoom in a bit. Hover your imp over the timeline canvas, hold L1 and press the right directional button to zoom in. This will keep the timeline duration to 1 second long, but stretch the space so that you can fit more detail into it. If you need to zoom out, just hold L1 and press the left directional button. Now let's put our slam attack keyframe onto the timeline. Grab the keyframe with R2 and place it at the start of the timeline canvas. Make sure you've got the slam keyframe and not the crouch one. The gadget automatically snaps to the surface of the canvas. The keyframe... Right, we're on to the final obstacle. There's no way around. The next step is to place our new Connie animation into the next step. Go to the Assembly menu and back to the Animate menu. Connie's microchip X. Any longer and it won't feel snappy enough. Hover double-ended arrow square button by the number very small zoom in. This will keep the timeline duration to 1 second long, but stretch the space so that you can fit more detail into it. If you need to zoom out, just hold L1 and press the left directional button. Now let's put our slam attack keyframe onto the timeline. Grab the keyframe with R2 and place it at the start of the timeline canvas. make sure you've got the slam keyframe and not the crouch one. The gadget automatically snaps to the surface of the canvas. The keyframe is only a fraction of a second long at the moment, but we need it to fill the length of the timeline. So hover over the keyframe and hold the up directional button to scale it. Make it the same length as the timeline. Now we want to wire the timeline up to a button press, just like we did with the crouch. Move the timeline canvas so that you can see the controller sensor and the timeline gadget. Open the controller sensor tweak menu with L1 and square. I'm going to use L1 as the slam attack button. Hover over the output port of the L1 button and press X to create a wire. Stretch the wire down to the timeline gadget and connect it to the power port on the bottom. You can now use the L1 button to perform Connie's slam attack. Give it a try in play mode. At the moment, it's just an animation, so it's not going to do anything to the blocks. But in the next step, I'll show you how to add some force to it. When you're ready to continue, return to edit mode, rewind time, and start the next step. The slam attack animation is all set up, but it's not doing much besides looking cool, so we need to add a gadget to our timeline that will emit a force when Connie slams the ground. The gadget we're going to use for this is the force applier. Go to the assembly menu and open the gadgets menu. Find the move as an output menu and open it with X. The icon for the force applier looks like a gust of wind. Select it with X to equip it to your imp. I hope you've still got the timeline open. If not, open it with L1 and X. Stamp the force applier onto the timeline canvas below the keyframe. Press circle to unequip the force applier from your imp. The force applier isn't very strong by default, so we'll need to tweak it. To open its tweak menu, hover over the gadget, hold L1 and press square. At the top of the tweak menu is the force strength slider. Its icon is a beefy arm. Drag it all the way up to 100% using your imp. That will ensure the force emitted will overcome the gravity in the scene and the friction between the blocks. Next, increase the force speed to 10 meters per second. That will give the slam attack some punch. If you take a look at Connie, you'll see a green zone around her. Anything in this zone will be affected by the force applier. At the moment, the zone isn't much bigger than Connie. Hover your imp over the zone and arrow gizmos will appear. Grab them with R2 and move your imp to change the size of the zone. Or you can scale the zone more precisely in the force applier tweak menu. Go to the tab called Zone Size. Grab the zone size slider with X and set it to about 3.5 meters. Okay, let's test out Connie's new powers. Switch over to play mode. Possess Connie and give her new slam attack a try. Oops! Looks like it's more power than Connie can handle. The force applier is pushing her off the platform. Switch back to edit mode and rewind time. In the final step, I'll show you how to tweak the force applier so that it only affects the objects we want it to. To prevent the force applier from pushing Connie off the platforms, we're going to use labels. Scope back into Connie and open up her microchip. Open the timeline canvas with L1 and X. Now tweak the force applier with L1 and square. Labels can be given to any object in the scene, and gadgets like the force applier can detect them. In the force applier tweak menu, go to the Labels tab. By default, it will detect all labels. There are labels for all sorts of objects: foes, scenery, targets. The friend label is used for playable characters like Connie or friendly characters like Cuthbert. So if we deselect it, the force applier will no longer affect Connie. Hover over the friend button and press X to deselect it. It's the button with the heart icon. Now Connie should be able to blast through the blocks without firing herself off into space. Use her new skills to pass all the obstacles. And you can use your new skills to create some characters for your scenes. When you've successfully rescued Cuthbert, go through the door to finish this tutorial.
Hi, I'm Mark, Creative Director of Media Molecule, and I'm going to present a simple masterclass that will hopefully help you use some of what so far and turn that into an entire game. I'm going to be focusing on a remix of the Dreamiverse Dash game. That means take a copy of something, mess around with it, which is always a really good way to learn. I will be reiterating some of the basics that you may have already learnt, but basics make for strong foundations, and strong foundations make for strong structures. Yes. So, first of all, try playing the game, get familiar with it, and when you get past the finish line, we'll dive in and start tinkering. Get past the finish line, make for strong foundation, mess around with it, which is always a really good way to learn. I will be reiterating some of the basics that you may have already learnt, but basics make for strong foundations, and strong foundations make for strong structures. Yes. So, first of all, try playing the game, get familiar with it, and when you get past the finish line, we'll dive in and start tinkering. Okay, let's start by making sure we feel comfortable navigating the space. So here's a quick reminder of how we do this. If you feel you're already a master at camera controls, then you can skip this step. Use the left stick to move forwards, backwards, left or right. Use the right stick to look in a different direction. If I hold down L1, I can now use the left stick to move up and down instead of forward and backward. We use the L1 button a lot to alter the functionality of other buttons, much like a shift key on a computer keyboard. So, if you ever hear me accidentally say shift, you'll know I mean L1. This level is pretty large, and it's pretty slow using this method if you want to get to the other side of the track, for example. So let's remind ourselves of some quicker ways of moving around. If I position my imp tip over a place I want to go, I can hold down L1 and tap R1. This will zip us there in an instant. Finally, another useful method is to position your imp tip over a place you want to go to, just like before, except this time hold R1, which will lock your imp onto whatever you are hovering over. You can now use the left stick to zoom in and out and the right stick to orbit around the point you grabbed. Using this method, you can also use the motion sensor in your controller by physically moving the whole thing to orbit around the point you grabbed. This is a very nice method once you get used to it. Have a go. It's worth spending time with these techniques until you feel comfortable moving around. When you feel you're getting the hang of it, click the big arrow and we'll do the next step. Okay, you should be confident about moving around with camera controls now, so let's start changing the actual scene. Before we do that though, you may have noticed lots of these little bright cubes scattered around. These are gadgets. We don't need to see them for now, so let's hide them. Go to the menu, find the Show Hide button, and make sure electronics are turned off. That'll make things a bit clearer. Okay, let's start changing the track layout. In this step, I'll be talking about deleting, moving, and cloning. If you feel you're already a master of these techniques, then feel free to skip this step. A really easy thing to do is just delete some bits. Position your imp tip over a module. You'll see it highlight to show which thing you're over, and then you can simply press the triangle button to delete it. You'll also find a delete tool in the menu. Remember, use the square button to show or hide the menu. In the Tools menu, you'll find the Delete tool, but I suggest you try to remember the shortcut buttons. It will make for a far more fluid experience, and this is a masterclass after all. Sometimes you'll notice these little white outlines that remain. These were added as an artistic choice using Paint mode after the various track modules were placed. If you want to learn more about painting, then check out the art tutorials. But for now, feel free to just delete them if you wish. It won't affect how the scene plays either way. And remember, you can use the left and right directional buttons to undo or redo your actions. We can also really easily move any of the pieces in the scene. Move is the default tool for the imp in edit mode. You'll know the imp has this tool equipped by the icon on its tip. You should see these 4 arrows. If you see something else, then you have another tool equipped, but you can easily lose it by pressing the circle button to get back to. Hello again. I know some of you out there like to be all neat and tidy, line things up, keep things at right angles, etc. If this is you, then you can use the various guides to make you feel less itchy. Grid Snap is most useful for this. Look in the menu under Guides. So, let's add some new objects to the scene without using the clone tool. If you can't see your menu, remember to press the square button to make it appear. For some new objects, we'll need to go and search the Dreamiverse. Do that by clicking this button on the assembly menu. You can go looking for whatever you want, but for the sake of this tutorial, we'll stick to the Dreamiverse collection. So make sure you're in there. Go in and choose a bounce pad with X. So, by now you know how to build a scene from scratch. But let's explore a really quick and easy way to add some movement and bring your scenes to life. Let's animate a part of the track using Dream's very own special version of motion capture. Movement in it. And grab yourself an action recorder. You'll now in the scene have appeared, if you'd previously hidden them. We want to see gadgets now, so this is all fine. Stamp it into the scene with the X button. If you've placed it, it will be armed and ready to start. Only when you grab the item you want to move will the recording start. So let's do it. Remember, it will only record while you are actually grabbing, adding more movement if you like. Moves. Congratulations! You just officially became an animator. Forever. If you want to learn more about animation, you can animate it too. So there's really nothing to stop you. Hello again. Let's get a bit deeper now. Assuming you haven't gone triangle button mad and deleted everything in the scene on electronics. Notice if you hover over the object you animated, you'll see the path that it follows. And the gadget the animation is in will throb. You can delete the gadget with the triangle button if you want, or leave it. It's up to you. Position your IMPS tip over the object and select it with X. You'll then see these contextual buttons appear. This bounce pad isn't actually a single object. It's a few objects that have been grouped together. But we can go into this group to mess around with the individual members of it, much like going into a folder on a computer. Press this button to scope into the group. You'll notice everything else go grey and blurred, except the things in the group. Yes, some of these things are still colourful. They're a special case, which we'll ignore for now. Pressing the Hide Everything Else button will make it super clear what is in this group, as it will hide everything else. We are now scoped into this bounce pad, and you'll notice that a gadget has appeared, which was invisible before. Gadgets will hide themselves unless you are in the same scope as them. There are exceptions to this, but we don't need to concern ourselves with those right now. So, you can go back or leave this scope by pressing this button in the corner. You can also use a shortcut to scope in and out. Hover over the object, hold L1 and tap X. This will take us in. Holding L1 and tapping circle button will take us out. In, out, in, out. Shake it all about. So, make sure you are in the bounce pad scope. You should see this gadget, a microchip. You can recognize a microchip by this little symbol. We can look inside the guts of a microchip by either selecting it with X and using the Open Microchip button, or by holding L1 and tapping X. This will tunnel us into the microchip and reveal some of its inner workings on its circuit board. It's possible you may be looking at the back of the circuit board when you first open it. If that happens, then simply move your camera to look at it from a better position. Or you can also use the L1 plus R1 trick on the circuit board to quickly zip to a better viewing position. We won't concern ourselves right now with everything on this circuit board. Let's just try changing the value on this slider using X. This will affect how high the bounce pad sends the character. Try ramping it up, and then switch to play mode to try it out. Remember, you've only changed one bounce pad though, not all of them, so try to remember which one you changed. Did you come across any camera pointers or trigger zones in your explorations yet? No? Then let's find one. There should be one right near the start gate. Assuming you haven't deleted them all, they look like this. This is a trigger zone, and this is a camera pointer. Notice that when you hover your imp tip over either of these gadgets, a wire will appear. This shows us that they're connected to each other. A trigger zone is a way of saying, when something enters a certain area, do something. In this case, the trigger zone activates the camera pointer. When the cone character is in the trigger zone, a camera pointer will force the camera to look in a defined direction. If you select the trigger zone with the X button, then you'll see the area that it cares about. You might need to zoom out a bit to see it fully. If you position your imp tip over the green zone, you'll see that arrows appear. These show us that we can change the dimensions of the area. Just hold down R2 and drag. Press the circle button to deselect the trigger zone. There is another way to change the parameters of a trigger zone that gives you more control, but I'll save that for another time. We'll keep it simple for now. If you now select the camera pointer, you'll see some arrows appear. These show you the way the gadget wants to make the camera look. If you grab the camera pointer gadget by holding L2 instead of R2, you'll be able to change the defined angle. Use either the sticks or motion sensor. Let's look over here, and we'll see a trigger zone that has multiple wires coming off it. We can trace these wires to see what they are connected to. Handy little tip. If you use the L1 plus R1 trick on a wire, it'll take you to the other end of it. Very handy. We can see that we are connected to this large microchip. We'll take a look in there later. The other two wires are connected to camera pointers. If there's more than one camera pointer connected to a trigger zone, then the camera will blend between the two defined angles, based on how close the character is to each one. It's also worth noting, if you have a camera pointer in a scene that isn't connected to a trigger zone, then it will be on all the time and take away a player's ability to manually control the camera angle. When you feel you've understood trigger zones and camera pointers, why not try adding your own somewhere? You'll find... Okay, let's start messing around with some other stuff. First of all, if you haven't already found it, find the big microchip labelled Level Logic. You see this little symbol down here? Remember, this tells us that this is indeed a microchip and has some exciting stuff inside to look at. To take a look inside, we can select it and press the Open Microchip button, or hover over it with your imp tip, hold L1 and press X. This will reveal the guts of the microchip. Don't be put off by the word microchip, by the way. It's just like a cupboard. You can put stuff in it, and it helps to keep things neat and tidy. You can close it again by clicking the close icon, or by holding L1 and pressing the circle button, either on the chip itself or on the revealed circuit board. So let's take a look at what this microchip contains. First of all, we have a sun and sky gadget. This will let us change some parameters regarding the sun and sky. So let's do that. But first, remember how I said microchips have this symbol on the corner, like this? Well, we can see the sun and sky gadget, which looks very similar to a microchip, doesn't have the symbol. This isn't like a cupboard. This is more like a cup in a cupboard. Are you keeping up with me? Feel free to go and get a cup of tea. It's pretty simple. There are microchips and gadgets. Microchips have this little symbol, gadgets don't. Why am I going on about this, I hear you say? Well, to get inside a microchip, as I've already said, we can use the L1 and X shortcut. But to see what delights a gadget has to offer, we use a different shortcut. We use L1 and square button, often referred to as tweaking. Or, of course, you can simply select it and use the tweak button on the context menu. Why not use the same button for opening a microchip and a gadget, I hear you say? Good question. I'm going to answer that. Microchips can be both opened up and tweaked. If you use the tweak shortcut on a microchip, L1 and square remember, then you'll get the microchip's tweak menu, not. So let's finish up by looking in this gadget here, Global Settings. Remember, L1 plus square button to get at its tweak menu. We can use this to set how strong gravity is in the scene, for example. Be sure to tick this button on or it will ignore the setting. As for the rest of the stuff in here, feel free to take a look inside. I won't go into detail. We've
To prevent the force applier from pushing on it. It's like the force of obstacles.
Hello, I'm Kareem, Art Director of Media Molecule. Today I will be doing a sculpture masterclass. I'll be modeling a male bust and going through basic modeling techniques to block the general form of the sculpture and build up to more detailed techniques and more sculptural philosophies and attitudes to find your own personal style in Dream. I hope you find it inspiring for you to start sculpting and find your own style in Dreams. And now we begin sculpting our head. The first phase is to block out the general shape of all the head and bust components. Here we go. This is a sculpture pedestal that I've made earlier for the purpose of this tutorial. Also, I've made the space around us and put in it some of my favorite sculptures for inspiration and reference. I've also pre-lit it with nice lights to help us sculpt in a nice atmosphere. Before we start the sculpture, I would like to recap that it's very important to have learned the camera controls. In the Dream tutorials, you will find tutorials just focusing on the camera controls and tells you all about the different nuances of it. The most important one is the grab cam, where pressing your move button on your primary controller will grab the point in space that your imp tip is over. This is the imp tip on top of the imp here. So if I put my imp wherever I want to go, press the move button, pull myself towards that point or push myself away, you see that the camera is moving accordingly. It's very important to have practiced this in order to proceed with the sculpt tutorial. There is also other features in the camera, like zooming, which makes you zoom in right close to an area in order to work on very fine detail. I would recommend that you practice using the camera controls now, and when you feel confident in them, click the arrow on the video to go to the next. The first thing I'm going to do is open my sculpt menu by pressing the T button on my secondary controller. I will pick the modes and choose the sculpt mode. Sculpt mode defaults on shapes. The shape I'm going to start with is the sphere shape. When I start pressing my T button on my primary controller, I can smear my shape continuously like that. This is the tool that Sculpt Mode defaults in. Instead, I'm going to change to Stamp Shape tool, which allows me to stamp singular stamps of my chosen shape. This is the tool I'm going to start with in my sculpture. Now I need to stretch my sphere shape. To do that, I'll use Form. I tap my two controllers together, which puts me into the form state. Once I'm happy with that, I press the T button on the secondary controller to lock the shape that I've stretched. Something like that. Now I need to turn on some guides to help me place my first edits. To do that, I will open my menu again, press the guide menu and select the Stay Upright guide. Pressing that fixes my shape to upright position only and doesn't go in any other orientation. By pressing the second toggle beside it, it allows it to only rotate by 90 degrees only, like this. The next guide I'd like to enable from the start of my sculpture is the mirror guide. This allows me to work in symmetry, which is very useful for modeling ahead. To do that, I will go to the guides, enable it, and this activates the mirror guide, which places a copy of every edit I do. This is very useful in modeling ahead. You can see the mirror plane as well is drawn in the center. I will switch that off because I prefer modeling without. Now to place my first stamp, I'd like to get my two mirrored copies exactly aligned on top of one another. To do that, I try to get that center line aligned as much as I can. When I do that, I press the T button on the and the first one, a more square button, third way. Move on to the next step when you're ready. The back of the head is a little bit too long. To modify the shape, pick a different shape. Shortcut to toggle. Now I would like to exit my sculpture. I'll open my menu again and start a new sculpture. Pick the cylinder shape. Back my stretch tool to stretch that cylinder into the right size. Stretch it from the top and from the bottom. The next thing I will do is pick another shape, the sphere shape, another time, and stretch it using the form gesture into an ellipse shape, like this. Scale it up, and remember I need to be in the stamp tool. Do another stamp. I will exit the sculpture again to get the upright guide back on to get a clean cut at the bottom for my bust. I got the shape of the top part now and the bottom part of my sculpture. I keep toggling between turning upright off and on. I'm now going to scale a portion to each other. I selected the two together by using my X button and selecting the two. So this is a good more. Now I'd like to re-enter my sculpture and now to do the basic shapes for the nose, mouth and chin. For the nose, I'll pick a cube and stretch it again using to this shape. Place it between the two eye grooves that we've done earlier. Use a little bit of soft blend by dialing it up and placing that edit. Again, I can move my edit after the fact using the move tool, just to get it more perfect. That's the basic shape I need for the nose. To do the mouth shape, the mouth or the lips usually sit on top of what we call the mouth barrel, which is a big protruded muscle area around the lips. It usually goes until the middle of the eye socket. I will use a cylinder to do the top part like that and use a little bit of soft blend to blend it with the face. This gives me the first top half of the mouth, and then a smaller cylinder at the bottom to do the bottom section of the mouth. This is sort of a combination of the muscles and lips around this area simplified to the basic form. To do the chin, we'll use the sphere shape and with the head shape. Like that. And now I need to do a little modification to the jaw to make it is a little extra. This is a guide to know the relationship between the mouth and that edge or the corner of the jaw. So we just take a little bit off using a cut from the base of the cylinder with a little bit of soft blend, and it's more convincing or more elegant shape. This is where it should be from these two axes. Now to do a little indentation in the skull, which we always get in the human skull, I will use a sphere and flatten it to do that indentation. I will try to get the flattened sphere as close as possible to the kind of shape I want to scoop out of the head. But rather than doing it in a very sharp cut like that, again, I will turn on a little bit of soft blend to do a softer indentation. I just move my hands in and out till I get the relative position that I want. I notice that my head is starting to take shape now, and the back of the head needs a tiny stretch still to make it slightly smaller. So I get my stretch tool and do that. By the way, from the menu, restores it again to its default uniform shape. I'll stretch my sphere shape to try to get the flat sphere that I want to do the ear. Again, the ear size is roughly from the start of the brow till the bottom of the nose or the base of the nose. That's and the positioning of it starts there and ends there. We put it on the side where the jaw finishes, and then I'll get my stretch tool again and give it a little bit more width. Going back to the move tool to keep repositioning it, and I turn a lot the camera around to try to get that positioning as successful as possible. It's very important to look at the ears, just the sphere, then the ear, and it's very... Now to do the eyes, I pick the sphere shape and place the sphere in the middle of the eye groove. The size of the eyeball is about half of that shape, and the distance between the two eyeballs is another eyeball. So I'm just trying now to place the first stamp of that eye in a relatively good position. To help me do that, I'm actually going to stamp that first eyeball in the middle, which is the distance between the two eyes. I will put it there as a guide for me. And then I will put the eyes in the socket. I'm pushing them back because they're not as front as the one I put as a guide. Now that I've placed them with the distance between them reasonably right, I can delete that using the delete tool, and that helped me just place them relatively well. Now we begin the second phase of our head masterclass, where we add more detail to all the face anatomy and the upper body. Now to add some more detail to the cheeks section. In this area here, I will add some cheek muscle. So the shape I need to use again is the sphere tend to use the sphere a lot in the early point of making head. Squash the sphere using the form again into this sort of shape, and then make it the right size of the top part of the cheekbone and soft blend it using our blend it a little bit. There is a muscle that goes on the side of the nose under the eye, but always flatten it a little. Now we're going to add some detail. You want to emphasize the jaw long ellipses on this. Now to work on the mouth and lips area to add more. I'll pick the cylinder shape. I have to commit to it. Like for example, now I keep putting the cylinder at the back of the cylinder to extend the mouth shape to ends at the middle of, but it feels. Now to add some bulk to the lips, start with that center part of the lip and using the same. And now to work on adding some detail, shape, and then using the same. And now to work on the brow area to get that. To add the brow detail, I don't mind that it's a bit too expensive. Now to add some detail on the neck and torso section of the form, and I keep moving my camera around and scale it up. One. Now I go back to the neck and add the muscle. See, the pedestal is really getting in the way when I'm working on that lower section. So I'll use. And now we're about to start phase 3, where things get more organic, own individual stuff. This is a stage where you rely more on your feeling and your eye. You get quite nice while adding the eyelid. That it's nice to zoom out and zoom back in to see what you're doing, and from a distance. Spray paint. Spray paint. This allows me to do a more chiseled look and drag them onto the color places and drag them onto the color mixer to get a variety of tones in my smears. So see, the smear places multiple edits in one press, so you can actually paint with your sculpture rather than place one careful edit after the other. I kept this technique till we got to a good place with the head, and I'm going to use the smear tool to make the hair. As the hair is more forgiving, is not a bad. I turned on the looseness tool as well, which is on my second masterclass. I'm using the smear tool now to create the hair. And as you can, it's nice to zoom and then you paint over your sculpture. Button and gesture from before. I can soft blend the color instead of the form. And I'm going just to choose different tones of color to paint my head and put some dark parts in the dark sections. to suggest a blend of doing now. I'm using the color picker so they don't now I go back to sculpting again to get the general shape of the that you will the eyes. So I'm going to first dark them. Sometimes these are just shadow, separate element that we articulate and have the eyelids close and open. This is more of an illustrated solution rather than an animation friendly one. So I'm just going to create a indentation of the eye so I can choose a different material to get just that little bit of shine on using this rounded work. So back in the sculpture again to color around and blend. To do the eyelashes, I still want to sort of tighten that is thinner and more. You can try to recreate that. Eyelid ends. And because it's made is very loose, just enough. Every time you catch your model from a different hair meets the more blended. We do the and shows you a very quick insight into some more techniques that are useful to see. Now I will show you how to save your work from this scene. First, select both parts of the bust. Then open the assembly menu and hit Group, which is in the context menu. Now, with the group selected, click Save as a new creation in the context menu and follow the instructions. So there we have it. That's the end of our sculpture masterclass. I hope you found it enjoyable and you feel inspired to make your own masterpieces. We're looking forward to seeing them in the Dreamiverse.
Hey. to the trunk of his car, retrieved the rifle, and shot his wife as she was cleaning up the kitchen after lunch. When his 10-year-old son came to investigate the commotion, the father shot him too. His 6-year-old daughter had the good sense to hide in the bathroom, but reports that she lured her out by telling her it was just a game. The girl was found shot up to the chest from point-blank range. The mother, who was shot in the stomach, was pregnant at the time. Police arriving on scene after neighbors called 911 found the father in his car listening to the radio. Several days before the murders, neighbors say they heard the father repeating a sequence of numbers in a loud voice. They said it was like he was chanting some strange spell. There was another family shot to death in the same state last month, and in December last year, a man used a rifle and meat cleaver to murder his entire family. Brutal killing took place while the family was gathered at home on a Sunday afternoon. The day of the...
Don't touch that dial now, we're just getting started.
And shot his wife as she was cleaning up the kitchen after lunch. Place while the family
on its way to heaven by your own hand. It's not too late if you act fast.
And shot his wife as she was cleaning up the kitchen after lunch. When his 10-year-old son came to investigate the commotion, the father shot him too. His 6-year-old daughter had the good sense to hide in the bathroom, but reports suggest he lured her out by telling her it was just a game. The girl was found shot once in... store. I got a message for all you folks out there in Radio Land. Day of the crime, the father went to the trunk of his car, retrieved the rifle, and shot his wife. Used in the crime at his local gun store 2 days earlier. This brutal killing took place while the family was gathered at home on a Sunday afternoon.
Look behind you. I said, look behind you. Okay, listen up, and don't you move. Need to take a piss? Hold it. The show's got just 60 seconds to go. I got a message for all you folks out there in Radio Land. So sit tight and bend an ear. Now's the time for action. Our society is rotten to the core. I'm talking to all the fine, upstanding folks got their welfare cut, got their jobs pulled out from under them. Yeah, you know what to do. Now's the time. Do it.
I don't see it now, but it's just all that in my stuff. I was not here at the moment. So got it up. It's a great ship. No, no, sit or shish. Who was no suit? Hop on in, Nelly. No, but I'm no way. Here, Portus. Have I met no work? Not that. I don't see it now, but it's just.
Used in the crime at his local gun store 2 days earlier. This brutal killing took place while the family was gathered at home on a Sunday afternoon. The day of the crime, the father went to the trunk of his car, retrieved the rifle, and shot his wife as she was cleaning up the kitchen after lunch. Used in the crime at his local gun store 2 days earlier. This brutal killing took place while the family was gathered at home on a Sunday afternoon. The day of the crime, the father went to the trunk of his car, retrieved the rifle, and shot his wife as she was cleaning up the kitchen after lunch. When his 10-year-old son came to investigate the commotion, the father shot him too. His 6-year-old daughter had the good sense... The rifle used in the crime at his local gun store 2 days earlier. This brutal killing took place while the family was gathered at home on a Sunday afternoon. The day of the crime, the father went to the trunk of his... The murder of a wife and her 2 children by their husband and father. The father purchased the rifle used in the crime at his local gun store 2 days earlier. This brutal killing took place while the family was gathered at home on Sunday afternoon. The day of the crime, the father went to the trunk of his car, retrieved the rifle, and shot his wife as she was cleaning up the kitchen after lunch. When his 10-year-old son came to investigate the commotion, the father shot him too. His 6-year-old daughter had the good sense to hide in the bathroom, but reports suggest he lured her out by telling her it was just a game. The girl was found shot once in the chest from point-blank range. The mother, who he shot in the stomach, was pregnant at the time. Police arriving on scene after neighbors called 911 found the father in his car listening to the radio. Several days before the murders, neighbors say they heard the father repeating a sequence of numbers. Used in the crime at his local gun store 2 days earlier. This brutal killing took place while the family was gathered at home on a Sunday afternoon. The day of the crime, the father went to the trunk of his car, retrieved the rifle, and shot his wife as she was cleaning up the kitchen after lunch. When his 10-year-old son came to investigate the commotion, the father shot him too. His 6-year-old daughter had the good sense to hide in the bathroom, but reports suggest he lured her out by telling her it was just a game. The girl was found shot once in the chest from point-blank range. The mother, who he shot in the stomach, was pregnant at the time. Police arriving on scene after neighbors called 911 found the father in his car listening to the radio. Several days before the murders, neighbors say they heard the father repeating a sequence of numbers in a loud voice. They said he was using some strange spell. There was another family shot to death in the same state last month, and in December last year, a man used a rifle and meat cleaver to murder his entire family. In each case, the perpetrators were fathers. The police say this string of domestic homicides is unrelated, though it could be part of a larger trend such as employment, child care, and other social crime, the father went to the trunk of his car, retrieved the rifle, and shot his wife as she was cleaning up the kitchen after lunch. When his 10-year-old son came to investigate the commotion, the father shot him too. His 6-year-old daughter had the good sense to hide in the bathroom, but reports suggest he lured her out by telling her it was just a game. The girl was found shot once in the chest from point-blank range. The mother, who he shot in the stomach, was pregnant at the time. Police arriving on scene after neighbors called 911 found the father in his car listening to the radio. Several days before the murders, neighbors say they heard the father repeating a sequence of numbers in a loud voice. They said it was like he was chanting some strange spell. There was another family shot to death in the same state last month, and in December last year, a man used a rifle and meat cleaver to murder his entire family. In each case, the perpetrators were fathers. State police say this string of domestic homicides appears unrelated, though it could be part of a larger trend such as employment, child care, and other social issues facing the average family. As the congressional debate over gun control flares up yet again, we regret to report the murder of a wife and her 2 children by their husband and father. The father purchased the rifle used in the crime at his local gun store 2 days earlier. This brutal killing took place while the family was gathered at home on a Sunday afternoon. The day of the crime, the father went to the trunk of his car, retrieved the rifle, and shot his wife as she was cleaning up the kitchen after lunch. When his 10-year-old son came to investigate the commotion, "You've been chosen."
Dad was such a drag. Every day he'd eat the same kind of food, dress the same, sit in front of the same kind of games. Yeah, he was just that kind of guy. But then one day he goes and kills us all. He couldn't even be original about the way he did it. I'm not complaining. I was dying of boredom anyway. But guess what? I will be coming back, and I'm bringing my new toys with me.
it.